Good morning, everyone. Hello, good morning, and welcome to the release event of Rhode Island Kids Count's newest publication, Root Causes of Overweight and Obesity, Community-Driven Solutions to Address Racial and Ethnic Disparities in Rhode Island. I am Paige Closhus-Parks, Executive Director of Rhode Island Kids Count, and I am so pleased that so many of you are here today. We have state agency leaders, community partners, educators, parents, caregivers, and advocates with us this morning, all dedicated and interested in learning more about what we can each do to address these disparities. I can't think of a better place than releasing this event than at Farm Fresh, Rhode Island. So we'd like to thank Farm Fresh for this space and to our community partners for the great suggestion to have the event here today. I'd also like to thank the Rhode Island Kids Count Board Chair, Marion Orr, who is here today. Thanks for being here, Marion. And I'm just so pleased at seeing so many bright, wonderful faces this morning. If you didn't get a chance yet, there are some refreshments on the side. You're in for a real great discussion today. So the conditions and environments where children live or born, where they play, where they work, it greatly impacts the health outcomes of our children. And it is completely unacceptable that in Rhode Island, our children of color have less access to those conditions that we need for healthy lives. So we must understand the root causes of these disparities in children's health outcomes and their well-being, and listen to the voices of the communities most impacted to create the solutions that support the health of all of our children and youth. As you'll see in this report, I see many of you are already diving in and looking at it. You'll see in the report that the community is really clear on the steps that we must take, and the recommendations at the end of that report reflect the vision we see for a healthier future for Rhode Island. We would like to thank the community partners that were really the key drivers behind this report. And we have Progreso Latino, South Providence HES out of Family Service of Rhode Island, Pawtucket Central Falls HES out of LISC, the Central Providence HES and One Neighborhood Builders, and the additional members of our advisory committee included the Rhode Island Department of Health, the Providence Healthy Communities Office, and the Rhode Island Public Health Institute. Thank you so much to these partners. And we also like to thank Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island for their support of this publication and the release event. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island has been a long-time supporter of equity and information-based advocacy. So I'd like to introduce now Carolyn Belisle, who's the Managing Director of Corporate Social Responsibility for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island, to provide some remarks.
Thank you, Paige. Thanks so much. With my back to you. I'm sorry. No, I'll stand next to you. So good morning. Thank you, Paige. Thanks everyone so much. It's such an honor, really, for me to be here this morning to offer greetings on behalf of Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Rhode Island. I've had a real privilege in my role to get to partner with Kids Count for a very long time, as Paige indicated, to collaborate, create, and make change for kids in our state. So Blue Cross has a vision to improve the health and well-being by leading access to high-quality, affordable, and equitable care. It's tough to argue with a vision statement like that, and I think it's safe to say we all share in the belief that every child should have the opportunity to grow up happy, safe, and healthy. And clearly the health of the future of our communities starts with our youngest residents. There's also no question that today, more than ever, data is driving and shaping the important conversations about equity and about how to address disparities in essential needs and the social determinants of health. So my colleagues at Blue Cross, who, by the way, Paige mentioned, where equity is really a solid foundation of our overall corporate strategy, we continue to be grateful for this unique collaboration with Kids Count, which stands as the first clinical claims-based statewide data set of childhood overweight and obesity in Rhode Island. Since 2016, Kids Count, Department of Health, Health Center for Data and Analysis, Brown University School of Public Health, and 4 insurance plans have collaborated to collect accurate childhood overweight and obesity data at the state, city-town level, so that could be analyzed by race, ethnicity, age, gender, and health insurance status. And as we come together to hear this updated data today and trends on pediatric and adolescent overweight and obesity for Rhode Island, and to discuss the root causes, it's fitting that we're viewing the data today through a specific lens of racial and ethnic disparities, which have only grown wider and more alarming since the onset of the pandemic. Any of you who were here with us for this event last year might recall that the trends that we saw showing overweight and obesity decreasing from 2016 to 2019 reversed to an extent that wiped out any previous progress. We see and feel the tremendous impact on the mental well-being of our youth and the physical health of our youth, and that was only exacerbated by the pandemic. And while that alone is tragic, the disparities and inequities that are highlighted by this data are particularly troubling. With obesity linked to serious health issues that we are all deeply familiar with, diabetes, heart disease, cancers, and emotional and behavioral health issues, we cannot afford to be complacent, and that's why we are grateful to you at Kids Count for continuing to shine a bright light by helping us collectively name and understand root causes, and to organize critical conversations with residents to better understand the barriers that our families are facing and hear from them their own recommendations for solving them. We appreciate Kids Count's diligent research to learn approaches to address this issue so that together we can take action around those specific recommendations. Don't know about you, but I look to those regularly. This includes battling stigma, ensuring equitable access to nutritious and affordable foods for families, and increasing opportunities for safe and accessible physical activity for all children in school and in community. Blue Cross remains steadfast in doing our part and continues to make meaningful investments in programs like Summer Meals Program, Recess Rocks in Rhode Island, shout out to Jesse Jasper, Farm Fresh, Food Bank, you name it, so many partners. I hesitate to mention a list. But it's also why we joined Kids Count, Rhode Island Community Food Bank, and many other coalition members in support of promising legislation that would create a Healthy School Meals for All program so that school meals could once again be offered free of charge to students in Rhode Island. We will continue to advocate for promising solutions just like that one. Thank you all for coming today to hear this updated data, and importantly for the conversation from critical partners. I'm excited for the panel discussion, and thank you to Paige and Stephanie and Caitlin and everyone at Kids Count for the opportunity to support this project since the beginning, and for the tremendous role you all play in shaping policies for the betterment of kids in our state. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And I'm so pleased now to introduce our health policy analyst, Caitlin Rabb. Many of you probably know Caitlin. She is so amazing and fabulous and has been such a great leader in her role in leading the community conversations, and authoring this publication has just been so tremendous. So thank you, Caitlin, for all your hard work, and we're so pleased and excited to see highlights from the report. Caitlin.
Well, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be here and give highlights from the brief, and then kind of host a panel of our community partners to have a really rich discussion, which is kind of what this brief is starting, to how to work through these changes and how do we support our kids the best that we can. So next slide, Katie. So this is our brief, Root Causes of Overweight and Obesity, Community-Driven Solutions to Address Racial and Ethnic Disparities in Rhode Island. Next slide. So over the past 6 months, Rhode Island Kids Count has partnered with, as Paige said, trusted community partners and organizations to really gather input on the root causes of childhood overweight and obesity, specifically in Central Falls, Pawtucket, and Providence. And it was a community advisory committee was established, made up of health equity zones, which are here, as well as other community partners and key advocates and health experts in Rhode Island. So this group met monthly and helped plan community conversations with residents in these cities. We held an in-person community conversation at Progressive Latino to gather input on Central Falls and Pawtucket parents, as well as a virtual conversation to gather input from Providence youth and parents. We had Spanish interpretation to make sure that these conversations were engaging as possible, to get meaningful information in terms of how do we support, what barriers are there in terms of living healthy lifestyles. So again, thank you to our community partners that are here, as well as the ones that are not here in your organizations, for the work that has gone into this report. And I just want to close with saying that quotes from these sessions are highlighted throughout the report to kind of frame and ground us in community and what our residents are saying. Next slide. So healthcare only accounts for 10 to 20% of an individual's health outcomes, and so when we talk about what makes somebody healthy, we have to talk about the social determinants of health as well. So social determinants of health are defined as the conditions and environments where people are born, live, work, play, and this greatly impacts their health outcomes. So this includes economic stability, education access, their neighborhood and their built environment, and the social context. So this is a majority of our health outcomes. So when we look at food access and insecurity, the built environment again, poverty and socioeconomic stress factors, as well as weight, stigma, and discrimination in that social context. So most of these factors that impact healthy living are really out of an individual's control and are related to, as I said, these social determinants of health and areas of safe play and resources and availability of nutrition in their communities. So understanding and acknowledging these root causes are really important to understanding and addressing healthy weight and healthy living in childhood overall. Next slide. So when we talk about a root cause of food access and food insecurity, access to nutritious food is really important and a determinant of children's healthy eating and living. So food insecurity is defined as not always having enough food for an active or healthy life. So food insecurity in childhood can lead to really disruptions in eating patterns and habits that contribute to poor long-term outcomes. And so as you can see here on the graph, households of color, low-income households, and households with children in Rhode Island were more likely to report being food insecure in 2022. So again, we're seeing disparities in these root causes, so to provide context for the data that we see when we look at overweight and obesity. Next slide. So next, looking at poverty and socioeconomic stress. So children who live in poverty, especially those who experience deep poverty, are more likely to have health, behavioral, educational, economic, and social problems, and often lack healthy foods and recreational activities. So again, looking at the data on children in poverty in Rhode Island, between 2017 and 2021, 15% of all Rhode Island children lived in poverty. 76% of whom were children of color. And in 2020, more than half of Rhode Island's children of color lived in one of the 4 core cities, Central Falls, Pawtucket, Providence, and Woonsocket, which are the cities that have the highest poverty rates. And more than 3/4 of children in Central Falls and Providence were children of color. So again, seeing this disparity in poverty and socioeconomic stress. Next. Next root cause, the built environment. So again, there are disparities that we see in the resources available across Rhode Island communities and neighborhoods that contribute to factors that can impact a family's health and well-being. So these inequities in green space, air pollution, noise pollution, and safety really stem from historical policies and racism, redlining, and urban planning policies from the past that continue to marginalize and have marginalized Black, Latino, Native American people of color. So a couple of data points: low-income communities and communities of color are less likely to have access to green space, and when they do have access to green space, it's normally of lower quality or lower amenities. So it's not as useful as it would be for a white kid in an affluent neighborhood. So when there are fewer amenities, it's harder for kids to have safe recreational space, as well as the walkability and safety of a neighborhood are really important factors that impact a child's ability to be physically active. And you can see here in the quotes that this was something that really stood out in our participants, that there was a lack of recreational space and safe place in the neighborhood to feel safe about having their kid play if there's not a backyard, there's nowhere really to go. And also when we talk about air pollution and noise pollution, are both also key determinants of the built environment that really limit opportunities for healthy habits and living conditions. And so with these kind of bad pollutants in the air and all around you, it can lead to stress, high blood pressure, hearing loss, a bunch of physical conditions, as well as just a loss of quality of life and productivity of being outside and enjoying life. And the communities in Providence with the highest levels of noise are low-income communities and communities of color. Next slide. Next, looking at weight stigma and weight status. So we know that childhood overweight and obesity can put children at risk for poor, long, and short-term health outcomes. However, not all children who are overweight or obese have health problems and can be healthy. And we know that children who are overweight and obese can experience bullying, prejudice, and weight-based discrimination and stigma from society that kind of impact their school performance, their quality of life, their access to health care, and the timeliness of their health care, as well as their overall mental health and well-being. And so many in educational, society, workplace, healthcare settings perpetuate this stigma without recognizing the complex root causes of overweight and obesity and the social determinants of health that really are beyond an individual's control. So that was a brief, quick overview of kind of root causes. I mean, I wish I could go deep dive into each one of them, but that's all we have time for today. And now we're going to move on to the BMI and the overweight and obesity data. And first I want to kind of talk about the limitations of body mass index as a measure of children's health. So BMI is defined is one of the proxy measures commonly used because it's a low-cost, simple measure that's widely available for providers and practitioners. Although it's currently the most widely accepted and used measure of population-level obesity, it does have limitations that can contribute to misconceptions and biases and inequities about weight and healthy living. So the BMI does not really factor in a person's gender, race, or sex, which kind of affect their their weight and their fat composition. So that's something to note when we're looking at this data, and we want to ground this data in those root causes that we talked about and the social factors that we discussed earlier in the social determinants of health in order to really understand how can we support kids and children and youth no matter where they live or what size their body is. So next slide. And so before I do this, I want to thank our data partners, Ellen at the Department of Health and Michelle Rogers at Brown University, who are instrumental to collecting this whole data process. I know it's a very long process to go from the health plans to getting it here on this screen. So thank you for that. Yes. So here, when we look at the prevalence of overweight and obesity in Rhode Island in 2021, overall in Rhode Island, 16% of children were overweight, 23% were obese, and a combined prevalence of 39%. And you can see here on the map and in the briefs, you can probably see a little bit better. This one's a little bit blurry, but the breakdown of city and town by overweight and obesity. Next, when we're looking at disparities, when we look at insurance status, half of Rhode Island children with no insurance or an unknown insurance status were overweight or obese, compared to 47% of children with public insurance and 30% of children with private insurance. And so nationally, children living in poverty Black and Hispanic children, foreign-born and non-citizen children are most likely to be uninsured, or receiving public insurance. And then when we look at race and ethnicity, we also see a disparity or difference there. So in Rhode Island, Hispanic and Black children are more likely to be overweight or obese compared to white children. So next, when we talk about the impact of COVID-19 on families, Carolyn touched on this a little bit. So last year when we presented this data, we started to see somewhat of a change in direction from what happened from 2016 to 2019 when we were seeing a decrease in overweight and obesity. Since the onset of the pandemic, however, the obesity rates for all children have increased. However, there are noticeable differences again with Black and Hispanic children continuing to have higher rates of overweight and obesity since the COVID-19 pandemic. And we know that low-income families and families of color were the hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, because of a resulting economic crisis. Children of color were more likely to attend schools that were fully remote, as well as miss school due to COVID-19 and fear of exposure by their families, and limiting access to healthy school meals and all of those resources that occurred in schools. So we are seeing that there's a widening disparity when we look at the impact of COVID-19 on families with overweight and obesity. So sorry, can we go back one? No, that's okay. So yeah, so I think this is a really important graph to kind of see some of the trends in what we're seeing pre-pandemic compared to post-pandemic. And again, as I talked about, some of the reasons that the pandemic may have impacted childhood overweight and obesity are school closures, remote and hybrid learning, as well as limited access to school and recreational supports. And it also really highlighted the importance of the root causes of overweight and obesity and the systemic issues that families were facing that contributed to childhood overweight and obesity that were discussed earlier. Okay, now we're ready, Katie. So next we have our recommendations grounded in our participants in community. So our recommendations are work with communities of color to identify needs that are rooted in and exacerbated by systemic racism and develop community-driven, racially aware solutions. Increase the accessibility of food banks and the quality and variety of food. Provide access to free healthy school meals. Improve the quality of school meals and provide opportunities for students to work with schools to get choice and vote on healthy school meals. Support partnerships between food pantries, farmers markets, and community health workers in schools to really support students and their needs. Promote collaboration between schools and parents to educate children and leverage that opportunity. Next slide, perfect. Improve the built environment in low-income communities by enacting intentional policies and providing resources that are equitable and mitigate the history of harm. Provide more accessible, affordable, and safe recreation spaces. Expand grant programs to provide additional free and low-cost recreational activities. Promote community collaborations to provide more physical activity opportunities, as well as provide education and financial support for parents so that they can provide options and nutritious foods to their children. And provide opportunities for parents to get more involved in advocacy, improve the Rhode Island Works program, and increase the Rhode Island Earned Income Tax Credit to address basic poverty needs and help families move out of poverty. Provide opportunities for parents to get more involved, and really acknowledge and dismantle weight-based stigma and discrimination by creating weight-inclusive policies and protections and spaces for families. So those are our recommendations. Lastly, we have an advocacy tool for community members to take those recommendations that they have and put them into action and what's next. A lot of what we saw during these community conversations, there's a lot of passion, there's a lot of drive from parents of wanting to support their kids but they don't know what the right advocacy opportunities, they don't know how to make that change in terms of changing these policies. So this tool is for parents and community advocates to really know who can change this, who can make this change, how can I do it, what tips and tricks are helpful when we are wanting something and asking for something. Katie, next slide, please. And so how to make your voice heard, how to find your elected officials, how to submit hearings, go to your school wellness committee meetings, and share who you are, your personal story, and what your ask is and why you're doing this. And we hope to have this in Spanish when it's online, so that's hopefully to make it more accessible for parents and families to make their voice heard and continue to advocate for their communities and their children. And next slide. So again, this is just some more acknowledgments and thanks so much on the data project, to our community advisory committee, as well as our data partners for their support of this publication and the work that has gone into this. And I am so excited to welcome our community partners up here to have a conversation based on this and this whole experience of how do we support our families and community members.